Thank you for tuning in to the BVLOS Blueprint. I'm Adam Zuckelbach, and with me is our Director of Regulatory Affairs, Rob Knockenhauer. Today, we will be discussing our new BVLOS waiver approval for operations over people and moving vehicles. Rob, let's just jump straight into it. Why is this waiver such a big deal?
So the waivers that have been granted, so we have 3 clients that have been issued this approval. And so the distinction here is that we've been working with clients for years now, helping people to get approvals for doing BVLOS operations. And there have been a couple of issues with doing BVLOS operations, not issues, but just challenges, right? So, a big challenge is, having people, involved in the operation. And so we've reached a point where, over the past year or so, we've been able to help people get approvals that have allowed them to do operations without the need of visual observers. So, and that's been measured for the shielded operations volume, where if we're operating below 100 feet above structures or the ground, we can operate without visual observers. The one caveat is roadways and areas where there could be, clusters of people that could be higher than what would be planned for. So we can't have so the requirement there is you need to have areas that are sanitized from having people on the ground. And if you're flying a corridor operation in a shielded context, doing that is very challenging. So, we had gotten some initial approvals that have allowed us to do, where we've indicated that we would do operations over roadways with low traffic volume. So we were counting cars, right? And so that was one way that we were doing it to mitigate the need for visual observers at locations. So that became part of the on-site evaluation, was counted cars. And even that is like, it's not a win, because there's still going to be roadways you could encounter where there could be a car that could be passing because it's above the threshold that we had. So this approval gives us the ability, leveraging the operational history of the Centero, coupled with, the ways that incidents happen. So, we're an aircraft manufacturer, right? I mean, you know what I'm talking about, Adam.
Yep.
Been here. You've seen them, banging wings in the fuselages and like getting the birds ready.
Oh yeah.
And so, having worked for, now Census and another, aircraft manufacturer, part of the process is you're going to crash drones, right? It's just an inevitable. If you are a drone service provider or manufacturer and you're operating, aircraft with any frequency, they crash. It's just a reality of the business. And so we're not immune to that either. And so, but what we've been able to do is we've been able to track the instances in the way that crashes have happened. And what I've observed, here at Census and in other places I've been, is that crashes typically happen during the takeoff or the landing phase of the flight. Mm-hmm. And when the aircraft is in steady level flight, the likelihood of something failing is significantly lower. So we've been able to leverage that documented history as the basis for applying for this permission to allow us to do operations over roadways and over, discrete sections of people. So the waivers specifically prohibit the ability to do operations over gatherings of people, mm-hmm. but we can fly along different areas. So that's really kind of the big delineator. And the roadways is big, so for a lot of the clients we work with that are operating on, have right-of-ways that they manage where they're doing these linear operations, being able to fly across roadways in various complex environments is very valuable. So that's the biggest deal of being able to fly over people and moving vehicles.
Yeah, and I think kind of to help put this in context, we'll dive into some of the use cases. Like you said, some of the clients are using this, and we've had one or two of them really leverage it already days after approval.
Yes.
So, first up here, we'll talk about Flagler. Flagler is one of the groups that has the operations over people and moving vehicles waiver. But go ahead and talk to us a little bit about what their maybe details of the waiver are and kind of how they're leveraging it to paint this picture of what we're able to do.
So What's interesting with Flagler is, so Flagler County is our neighbors to the north. So we're in Volusia County where Daytona is, and so just north is Flagler. And so we've had a good conversations with their team for, I guess, a number of years now. And so they finally got to a place where they, really appreciated the value proposition of the Centero, and were fortuitous where it happened to be at the right place at the right time, where the timing worked out, where we had this conversation with the FAA to kind of lay the groundwork to get this type of an approval in place. Worked out for Flagler, as basically they were the first organization to get this particular approval from us. So what their approval has done, and what all of these approvals are, like the ones that are out right now, is they're for very different use cases. And so Flagler's, operations are tailored for Flagler in ways that the others are not. There's a general criteria that was established for operations over people and moving vehicles, where for kind of lower, rural population density areas, the folks, they can run the aircraft in any configuration that they want. It can be, it's not restricted to any particular type of area. So they can be using it for surveying operations, they can be using it for right-of-way work, or anything else that they need to use it for in supporting their missions in the county. One of the operations, which is the one that they ran just yesterday, was along the shoreline. So what we did is we created some specific language for the shoreline, because, as most places in the country, it's true, is when you're near the shore, the population densities are higher. So, these are not rural areas. So what we were able to do was to describe, there's a requirement for a site validation to assure that the levels of people on the beach are low, or lower, and that there aren't gatherings of people. And if there are gatherings of people, then we would use VOs to kind of augment the assessment of that ground risk to steer the aircraft as needed around those elevated areas of ground risk. However, we're able to do operations along that shoreline, crossing roads, although there's not really roads along the shore per se, but certainly if there's like tributary rivers that go into the shoreline where you might have a bridge crossing, where you could still cross over those bridges in those areas of higher population density, and that's a specific, requirement, or not requirement, it's a specific feature of their approval, is having that ability to operate in areas of higher population density, supporting those shoreline assessment operations that are important for their environmental assessment missions, where they're looking at coastal erosion for the storms that come through. So that's
and I think to kind of paint the picture, Daytona Beach, where we're headquartered, a prime summer day in July when the beaches are packed full to the brim, this might not be a time or a place where the waiver can be leveraged.
Right.
But in certain times of the day, or even Flagler, who's kind of outside of that huge tourism draw, where the density on the beach is definitely lower, this becomes a prime example of where we can use this. And I think kind of to move on to kind of differentiate, like you said, each waiver that we've written so far is tailored to who it's written for. So I think that's a good transition point here to move to New Jersey Transit. So one of the most densely populated states in the United States has now a operations over people and moving vehicles waiver.
They do. And so for New Jersey Transit, the delineator there is the fact that where they want to fly is right-of-ways. So these are restricted access areas, where the general public is not going to be on the property that New Jersey Transit manages. So we were able to leverage that fact to allow for areas of greater reach and capacity. So their approval at New Jersey Transit allows them to cross over again in those more urban areas, to basically be able to cross any roadway within those areas. So that's a big game changer. Although there are exceptions. So we put a cap that basically allows them to operate in all but 3 counties in New Jersey, with kind of unfettered ability to operate over roadways or walkways or sidewalks, etc. And for the population densities that are higher, those more populated counties, where there is a higher population density, the requirements are, there's an allowance to fly over roadways, but there are restrictions. So, in the case you couldn't fly over like really major roadways, you could still fly over like 2-lane roadways. And so it still gives them some ability to operate in those, really densely urban centers. But in all honesty, it's probably, once you actually start looking at like what the restrictions are written in the waiver, it's still probably going to be fairly limited in the urban environment. But the reality is for the, kind of the lower density urban environments, that it gives them a lot of flexibility to cover really a good chunk of their service territory, which is a pretty exciting approval for their team. So we're happy we're able to get that put together for them.
Yeah, and I think, kind of what you touched on, the controlled access to the assets. I think you can see this scale and potentially like utilities where you have power lines running from substations out into, the rest of the area.
Right.
Kind of controlled access, but still in a semi-densely populated area. I think we'll see good success with that. And I think that's just another example. Not that we have a waiver or a client for that one yet, but I'm sure we'll be writing one soon if one's not already in the hopper. But kind of, it's kind of crazy, I think, where we were 3 months ago to where we are today. But Rob, where do you see a waiver like this moving forward? How do you see this one expanding?
So, how I see this going forward is getting, less restrictions. So right now, that right of way restriction I described, and even the beach, operations, even though they're allowed in areas of higher population density, there is a restriction of the overall exposure. So we have, limited the exposure to a certain duration of the flight. It will be over those areas of elevated ground risk. So, so what I would like to see us get to a place is where maybe we push that number a little higher. And the reality is like, it's unclear whether that's going to be necessary for some of our, so certainly the folks that we've been working with heretofore, that's been good enough, so I think for us moving forward, really it's us getting to a place where we have an aircraft that has an even higher level of reliability, where we can actually do basically unfettered operations over anything. So that would be, in my perspective, the thing that would be the holy grail is getting to that space where we can run these BVLOS operations in really kind of dense urban centers. So
that would be the golden ticket for sure. Operation essentially where in the United States, that's where we're striving for.
Absolutely. Yes. And so, and to that end, obviously, as an organization, we're making plans to do that, so we were talking about, beyond operations over, any type of ground risk, we're looking at potentially remote ops, right? So looking at, having a fixed wing as an asset that's in a box, right? And so, having that as a potential path forward where, the value of the VTOL fixed wing is in the fact that you've got that greater range. So as you start looking at like some of the DFR programs that are out there that are relying pretty heavily on multi-rotors, there are some of these areas where they're operating at, the outer reaches of those territories are simply inaccessible to those DFR programs. And so, being able to leverage the tools that we've been able to develop here to service those communities and those programs as well, is definitely a direction that I would certainly love to see our census go. So,
well, we'll continue to fight for greater flexibility in operations for Centero users and UAS operators out there in general. But Rob, I just want to say thank you again for joining in and giving us your wealth of knowledge here. And next time, catch us on the BVLOS Blueprint.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks.